Great. And then it's good morning, everybody, also online, in our online group, and everybody else watching this live stream. It's really good to have you all here on the third day of our ID Forum. It's the final day also. Yeah, really feeling my blues right now. What can I say? So far, like I said, we have celebrated the achievements, past years, a lot of those. You guys are awesome in that fashion. We have looked yesterday the new ID strategy, what it makes possible, and what immediate challenges and solutions, you came up with a lot, lie ahead of us next couple of years. And today, on the third day, we're going to look a bit further to the future. How the world might look 2050, 2100, somewhere over there. Yeah. We have a couple of people helping us to check, to get us prepared for the future. We have Nicklas Larsen, Senior Advisor, Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, and Ricardo Borges de Castro, Associate Director, European Policy Center. And without further ado, I give the stage for Nicklas.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? Am I coming through?
Yes.
Great, let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, here we go. Hello everyone. As you know by now, my name is Nicklas, and I'm really happy to be here with you, coming through the screen from Copenhagen, from my home office. And I'm really happy to be able to contribute to this important gathering and agenda of yours and the SALTO ID Forum. I know you've been going on for a few days now and that you still have some work ahead of you, and that's why I've been asked to prepare an information-dense perspective towards the future. For the next 30 minutes, more or less, I will ask you to use your imagination and to question the status quo together with me. And rather than thinking, what is he talking about? Or is this even realistic? This is more about you identifying relevant aspects that you want to work with for the rest of the forum. And I believe you have been given access to the slide deck. And during the presentations, please take note of the recommendations I will give you to several sources that you could use for further self-study. First, a few words about the Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies, which is a non-profit think tank devoted to future studies, as it says in the name. We were founded 50 years ago in collaboration with private and public organizations to better qualify decision-making through future studies and foresight. This is really a discipline that has regained its potential in the wake of the COVID pandemic, among other things. And while the future does not exist, it's about how we can increase our sense of agency and training our anticipatory capabilities, which means we train how to imagine and think of the future in certain ways. And that's what we do. Today we continue to work and equip and inspire individuals and organizations to act on the future today. Very shortly, on my lines of work, as said in the introduction, I'm a senior advisor and head of the culture and arts research area. And I was a senior curator for the UNESCO Futures Literacy Summit. And I have authored a 3-article series called Applied Futurism that looks into how the future is being used as a source for hope and sustainable development together with pioneers in the field. And my current flagship project is to get the future and future studies and foresight onto the curriculum in the Danish school system, as it really shouldn't be a thing that only the corporate or the political world engages with, as the future belongs to everyone. Enough about me. Let's get to the actual presentation where we want you, and together with me, of course, to imagine how the world might look like in year 2100. And I'm going to ask you something that might seem a little weird to some of you. But since the future does not exist outside our imagination, we have to use quirky tricks to activate it and to collectively imagine. So with that in mind, I want you, like this picture, close your eyes and imagine the world towards the year 2100. Look around in your imagination and keep your eyes closed while I will now read something for you. And while I can't see you, I really hope you have your eyes closed. You look through your apartment window. There are buildings as far as you can see. During the last couple of decades, the city transformed onto one of the world's mega cities. You can't see to the edges of the city anymore, only drones in the air looking like birds on the horizon defining the sprawl of the city. But you know that's beyond its limits, there's a landscape that is being rewilded to mitigate climate change, and nature is given a chance to restore. It calms you, and your health tracker lets you know that your serotonin levels are increasing and your stress levels are going down. You look over the city and sigh. Your tracker makes another sound and you realize that you're late to today's meeting about new efforts in the humanitarian work, helping the latest group of climate refugees to arrive in the city. You turn away from the window and you enter the metaverse to transport you digitally to the meeting. You look around at the other participants. The human population have grown older but stayed healthier due to the focus on preventive health in the healthcare system. The metaverse did manage to become an inclusive and available source in the end, adding value to everyday life. You think of the community you found here with other participants working and engaging in civil society, how inspiring it has become, and you smile. You realized your thoughts have drifted and you return to the focus on the meeting. Let's start, shall we? You may now open your eyes, and what I want you to remember and take away from this hypothetical narrative is that the person that I described here might already be born today. Granted that people born today will become more than 80 years old, then it's quite certain that a lot of young people will step into year 2100. Perhaps it will be your kids, your siblings, or the youth that you work with. And today we take a futuristic lens on what this future might include for this kind of people. When we look to the future, we often do it through a lens of megatrends. There are many different megatrends, and there are also many takes on what defines a megatrend. At the Institute, we have developed this framework of 14. Megatrends are these major pathways of development. We say that they are global in scope, but they would have various local implications. So while a megatrend are often expected trajectories that do not necessarily develop or occur in a linear fashion, that's what makes them interesting to look at and to see how and where they interact. In this narrative, towards year 2100, we're zooming in on 4 megatrends, which is sustainability, demographic development, technology, and democratization. Starting off with sustainability, a quite significant megatrend that encompasses the effects of climate change, resource scarcity, how we foster eco-security, and much, much more. As a megatrend, it will define the future in many, many ways, and especially in the coming decades. And without further effort to reduce the human footprint on the environment, the effect of climate change or global warming, resource scarcity, and so forth is expected to continue, partly driven by growth in the population and economic activities. The point here is that it carries key risks for ecosystems and cultures, water availability, biodiversity, and that's why many are disappointed in our government's lack of action compared to increased ambition. You have seen this graph before, but what is interesting is taking the long view on it. With current projections, the Earth might look completely different in year 2100. Global warming, sea level rise, and environmental degradation are set to alter the state of the planet from we know it today. The world is on a path to warm around 3 degrees above pre-industrial levels by 2100 under policies and commitments currently in place. This is a far cry from the 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees targets in the Paris Agreement, but it's also quite short of the 4 to 5 degree warming in many business as usual baseline scenarios. The difference between 1.5 or 2 or 3 to 4 degrees can sound marginal, but in fact they represent vastly different scenarios for the future of humanity. As an example, we can look to 41% increase in area burned by wildfires at 1.5 degrees, compared to a potential 97% increase in wildfires if we reach 3+ degrees. These statistics from the UN are available for droughts, wildlife, ice caps, and much more, and they exemplify the instability of our global climate system and ultimately the possibility for humanity to survive on this planet, and how that hinges on only a few degrees in difference. We can also look towards the impact of youth, Generation C or Generation Alpha, as we call them, younger vulnerable groups that are all represented by this study that recently came out. It is quantifying what we can call the intergenerational inequality of climate change. It found that the world that we have created might lead to a future where today's children will experience 3 times as many climate disasters, including wildfires, floods, and droughts, than their grandparents. This makes climate change to a cultural problem in our day and age. Will year 2100 be shaped by technical solutions such as geoengineering, where we realize how to extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere? Will we see a shift in human values and behavior? And how will we make sure that everyone will benefit from these solutions? Before we move on to the next theme, I thought I would share these insights with you from an interview I did with Sean Hazeldine about the future of humanitarian work in this coming and complex future. He's the head of innovation and foresight at the International Federation at Red Cross. And he is saying about humanitarian work in the future that vulnerability in the future can be seen as more common, more concentrated, more complex, and more costly. Disasters due to extreme weather events and climate and environmental disruptions are predicted to increase. By 2030, almost half of the world's poor population are affected and expected to live in countries that are implicated by fragility and conflict. The people least able to cope with disaster will be amongst the ones most affected. Beyond traditional drivers of disaster and crisis, our increased dependence on technology is bringing new complex risks and vulnerabilities, including potentially unforeseen cyber and digital threats. In addition to all this, increasing population density in urban and in particular informal settings is likely to result in significant deprivation and more hazard exposure. The combination of common and concentrated and more complex disasters means that when a disaster strikes, the impacts will be multiple, and the ability to provide immediate assistance is lower, and the cost is expected to increase. So while you may not be a humanitarian worker, this can be used as a proxy for community work, youth engagement, or work in general with vulnerable groups, as these groups of people tend to face the future first. And that's why they will need your care in new ways and likely more demanding ways in the future. If we look to demographic development, it refers to changes in a range of characteristics, distributions, and sizes in human populations. One of the most important effects of demographic development is urbanization. Here we can see people moving to the city and living in the cities increasingly globally. but it also includes the continuous population growth and the phenomenon of aging. Now, during the next couple of decades, we will see a reshaping of the global world population. And by 2100, the world population is predicted to reach 10.1 billion compared to 7.8 billion today. There will be a continuation of rapid urbanization, and 8 out of 10 will live in an urban area. And the projection of these current trends that reveals that the majority of future urban population growth will occur in developing countries, which is largely thanks to high birth rates coupled with improvements in public health, lowering infant mortality. Now, in that future, the world's 5 most populous cities by the end of this century will all have north of 50 million residents each. This is a steep growth compared to today, where we have Tokyo as the largest city with 37.4 million inhabitants. By 2100, it's estimated that 13 of the world's largest cities will be in Africa. Meanwhile, India will hold 3 of them, and none of them will be found in the Americas, in China, or in Europe. This will obviously have a huge impact on the infrastructure we know today, especially in form of both food supply or supply chains, trade agreements, and perhaps even shipping routes. So not only will the human geography change, but also the composition of the population. Here we see a changing composition from 1950 to 2001 towards the last one here, 2100. As you can see, there's a fairly significant change in the composition. At the global level, the population aging will unavoidably transform economies and societies due to this. And the number of older people will actually overtake the young. And that is about, I think it's about 2.4 billion people over the age of 65, over the 65 forecast by 2100, compared to 1.7 billion people under the age of 20. We would have to readjust to a society where there is more elderly people, and that has a lot of effects on services, care, and many, many different things. It might seem daunting with these changes that the human demographic and geography might bring to us over the next decades, but in this world, for all its imperfections, it is actually in a much better state than we might think. And I'll recommend you to look into this late Swedish professor Hans Rosling's work, Factfulness, on why the world is in a better shape than we actually think it is. He's quoted for saying, when things are getting better, we often don't hear about them. This is giving us systematically a too negative impression of the world around us. And here he has found statistics that shows how extreme poverty, democracy, basic education, vaccinations, literacy, and child mortality all are going in positive directions, while we obviously still have a lens towards the future called climate change that we need to combat. The third megatrend we want to talk about quickly is technological development, which is another source of change in society, you could say. And relevant subtrends here is the innovation and increasing access of technology, the fourth industrial revolution, digital economies, and of course, AI. This is a really broad one, and we start by taking a healthcare perspective towards year 2100, where healthcare will be much more democratized, more preventative, and it will be much more remote. As we can look at the democratizing health, as more people get online access, information and contact barriers are breaking down and allowing millions of people to access basic health information. We also have a fast decline in genome sequencing prices that provides a future of personalized health information, where wearables will monitor our daily lives and guide our actions. And on the last example, we have telemedicine reaching more remote and rural areas. It's already happening, but we'll see more of this in the future. As an example here in Rwanda, that is shaping the global rollout of everything from AI, health bots to drones deliveries. And here there's an example of a company called Zipline that's delivering blood to remote areas. There's also another example called the Safe Delivery app. It provides birth attendants with instant clinical guidelines for how to handle complications related to pregnancy and childbirth, straight to phones and tablets while people might be in remote areas. These two examples are great and have huge impact and shows how technology is being deployed to reach vulnerable groups. But we can't talk about the future of technology without also talking about the metaverse that is currently expected to arrive in some form 10 to 15 years from now. Corporations, people, and governments are already buying up land in the metaverse, with Barbados being the first state to announce an embassy. And while this is very exciting, we have to ask ourselves, is this an elitist dream or is it a world of possibility? In any case, the mind tends to wander and ask, who's the guardian of equal access, inclusion, safety, or new norms in this new Internet 3.0? And a lot of concern has been raised about the metaverse, and it has to do with how we limit that behavior online. And exactly that is a crucial point. How do we ensure that the future of digital infrastructures are inclusive? Today, AI solves more and more tasks for us, both in public and private organizations, and more decisions are being supported by machine learning. And it takes decisions in HR, in content creation, in legal environments. It's really omnipresent and all around us. And generally, we believe that it's a good thing because it makes us society more effective. But to simplify the issue at hand, machine learning algorithms require a lot of training data. And when training data is biased or faulty or favors one group over another, the stakes becomes very, very high here. And there is many well-documented cases of biased decision-making that triggered ongoing discussions about algorithmic fairness. As we don't have unlimited time today, I will recommend you to explore these two sources in your own work, Invisible Women and Coded Bias. Invisible Women is a book that exposes the gender gap in our world designed and based on data. And then there is the documentary called Coded Bias that explores how technology can both be racist and sexist. These sources unpacks why these systems often misidentify people for who they really are. So while equality means that everybody is treated the same and equity means that everybody gets what they need to be successful, if we are to reach these elements in the future, we also need to have fair data as well. But we rarely talk about data infrastructure and data interoperability while it's so damn important. So while this is an incredibly complex matter, and I should be the first to say that I'm no data scientist, a way to approach this is to start looking at data from the perspective of the FAIR principles. And to further educate yourself in this matter, which will be a skill needed towards year 2100, which is to make fair synthetic data sets, where you adjust for biases in training data that we feed algorithms to improve the decisions that machines are taking for us. The final megatrend that we want to use in the depiction of the narrative towards 2100 is democratization. In our times, we have seen an increased access to information and knowledge, equality of opportunity, and participatory equality, amongst other things, in personal, social, and civic spheres. However, it's also fair to say that we're also seeing some sort of regression and some sort of counter trends to the democratization here. And they include increased surveillance, the reduction of rights and freedoms, and tighter intellectual property laws, and growth of corporate power, not to say the least. And if we zoom in on all these counterings, then we cannot take for granted that Western liberal democracy. We cannot take that idea for granted towards year 2100, because the level of democracy enjoyed by the average global citizen in 2020 is down to the levels found in 1990. Freedom of speech is increasingly threatened, and autocracies are gaining ground around the world. You can say that we are living in an era of countercultures. And from this perspective, countercultures, digital movements, and actions against inequality and abuse of power are expressed through movements like Free Britney, Occupy Wall Street, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, Skolestrejk for Klima, and so forth. And these have been driving forces that are pushing the next cultural shift. In this revolution, characterized by the ability to gain forces in the streets rather than just online, is not necessarily being for and against certain matters, ideologies, or politics, but aiming collectively to challenge positions and the way we think about change. We can also look at trust, which is plummeting around the globe. With the sense of this erosion in trust of social media, politics, communities, perhaps even dinner tables. In all too many countries, dysfunction and distrust feeds on themselves and consume the very institutions that should be finding the solutions for them. So in a society full of distrust, which is kind of a trap, how can we escape? Here we have Stanford Social Innovation Review recommending a few steps to take, which includes how to deliver real benefits for people, strengthening social inclusion, accountability, transparency, and engage citizens in solving community and societal challenges. The question is, when we look back from the year 2100, will we see a time defined by our damaging business as usual behavior and mindset? Or will it be defined by the urgency of escalating societal, ecological, economical, even political challenges that could lead us to action? One thing is certain, and that is that there is a demand, for reimagining a more sustainable, just, and inclusive future. And that is a future that is not only diverse, inclusive, and intersectional in the traditional understandings amongst male and female, majority or minority. It's equally local and foreign. It's equally pen and paper versus tech savvy. It's equally present in and remote. And it's equally machine intelligence and human intelligence. So this is the mix with other factors to include as well, but just to show that diversity and inclusion and intersectionality in the future will be something else. That's why we need to train what we call our futures literacy, which is a new capability developed by UNESCO. And like reading and writing, this can be trained in many different ways. And we can actually train our imagination like a muscle that help us challenge our assumptions and biases and our worldview that basically guides our actions. A simple way to show the need for how our mind, the need for futures literacy and how our mind is colonized by very few and very dominant images of the future is by this. You can see dystopian science fiction, robots taking over, growth and capitalism as the only means for progress. We have Elon Musk taking over Mars, and we have nothing but flying cars and sky rises when we think of future of cities. And the idea here is that we struggle contrasting these things positively by reimagining how healthcare, welfare, education, work, and governance systems could look just 2 generations from now. And that's why we need to democratize futures thinking through participation. And that is what we're already seeing here, where we have future studies on one side and we have public engagement on the other side. When these 2 things overlap, we get what can be called participatory futures or participatory governance. And I'm sure Ricardo after me can talk much more about this, but the example of the conference on the future of Europe is really a prime example of how to make a participatory and including event that takes the citizens' opinions, wishes, and desires for what the future of Europe should look like into consideration. And with that in mind and the time constraint, I look to you, Callis. Should we stop here or could I continue for the last few minutes?
Yeah, time is pressing a little. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Great. Do we have any questions at the moment? Just checking. No, I think you can go a couple of slides more.
Great, thank you so much. Because I really want to show you this next one, which is the base principles of futures literacy that I want you to take away from here. When we think of the future, there is 3 distinct ways of doing it, but we favor 2 often just because it is easier for us as human beings over the 3rd one. So we need to train the 3rd one, and I'll go through them now. The first one is that we prepare for contingency. We protect ourselves from the potential futures. We make risk analysis, we build walls, we make security plans, we do disaster analysis, and so forth. It is about readying ourselves for something that might happen. Then there's the other one, which is that we plan for optimization. By developing or improving its system practices, this is where we take our Ricardo service, or we plan a wedding, or a company strategy. But what these 2 things have in common is that they tend to prolong the past, because we try to make the future as we know it. We try to extend the past into the future because we try to protect something. While this is important in some ways, we owe ourselves and humanity to start exploring new ways where we are open to emerging novelty, because I think it's fairly fair to say that we have outlived some of our systems and we need to start thinking about developing something new. So we need to start engaging with futures that we cannot necessarily make sense of today. We need to start exploring new contexts and new ideas, so we're not only preserving the past, but also developing the future. And on a final note, I'm gonna end on this quote from one of my heroes in this business called Future Studies, which is Pupul Bisht. She is head of the Decolonizing Futures Initiative. And she's saying, if we want to build better futures, leaving no one behind, then it means that we have totally dedicated acceptance that futures for all cannot be imagined by a few. It's not just about inclusion, it's about recognizing where power is held. Because at the end of the day, decolonizing futures means to make room for marginalized worldviews and historically marginalized cultural identities in futures work. And on that note, I will give it back to you, Kalle.
Thank you. Like we talked, preparing to this input from you, it was pretty heavy package. Do you have any questions from audience? At the moment, not yet, but I see a couple of people maybe writing something to our Padlet system. Peter Jan, is there anything coming?
Yeah, there is actually. It's probably not a surprise that the questions in the Padlet are related to the COVID-19 pandemic at this moment, and I'll just combine them into one question. So it's about the impact of the current COVID-19 pandemic on the megatrends, and one question was about the demographic level, that we would see people actually now leaving the cities. How would this have an effect in the megatrend? And the second part is on the societal level, so that we see quite a lot of societal divisions, not only economically, but that we also see like an increasing aggressivity on safety measures and on a lot of measures that are taking now in to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. So, what would you think of that?
Obviously, COVID-19 have had an impact on how cities take form. And we have all seen across the globe how the core, the center of the city was all of a sudden almost died out. And people started exploring the more urban areas, suburban areas to a larger extent. What that means for urbanization as a whole is still that people are centered in more dense areas than living in the remoter countryside, to put that in perspective. And what we also need to address here is that megatrends go on for possibly for decades. So while we have a little pocket called COVID-19 right now that might span over a few years, people will still very likely move back and inhabit the cities as the dangers they decrease. And then I need you to repeat the one on the societal, what did you say, social divisions?
Yes. That there's not only on an economical level that there are these divisions in the society are developing, and there's also like this increasing aggressivity and divisions between persons against, for example, the health and safety measures. And how this would impact on the longer term.
Yeah, and when I prepared this presentation and wanted to look at the democratization megatrend, I was actually seeing that myself, and that's why I took the alternative route of looking at counter trends. Because every time we have a megatrend, every time you have a trend, there is opposition. There is an opposing, opposite measure, basically, that you need to account for. And that's where the counterculture examples came in, because what COVID-19 gave us was that it surfaced a lot of systemic inequalities that needed to be addressed. And that is partly also why we see that much social uprising and so many different kind of movements shedding light on these very stark inequalities that there is in society, which basically speaks to what we can call polarization, which we have as another mega trend as well. And this is a great example of how the different trends are intersecting. I hope that was somewhat of an answer to a complicated question.
Yeah. Thank you. As a final note, to sum up, you have an audience of youth workers in the field of inclusion diversity. In 2 words, what would you say to them about the future?
In 2 words? I would say try to find ways to integrate foresight, future studies, or futures literacy principles in your work. While it may be difficult to see how you can apply the future studies or the futures thinking to your very urgent and pressing agenda in your day-to-day business, if you make it a continuous exercise, you'll develop a language that that allows you to act in a more long-term and innovative and perhaps even resilient way. That's why future studies and futures literacy is not something you just do once. It's not a catalog you order. It is a capability that you need to train. And like any other capabilities that you need to train, you need to make time for it and you need to practice.
Thank you. Thank you a lot for your input.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Copenhagen Institute for Future Studies. There you can find more of Nicklas' work. Next we have Ricardo Porquez de Gastro, Associate Director of European Policy Center. Welcome on stage.
Good morning, everyone. It's really great to see you. And after Nicklas' excellent presentation, first of all, I wanted to say good morning to everyone. I wish I could be there, but again, COVID-19, which was already referred to, as is really, putting an impact in our daily lives to the most basic things, as to be able to go to a place and actually after Nicklas' presentation, I think we would now have a couple of really interesting hours discussing this. I have prepared a presentation, but I think I'm just going to react and going to speak a little bit about maybe Kale's last question to Nicklas, for a group of young people that work on inclusion and diversity, what would you tell them? And so for me, I think I would rather spend the next 15 minutes that I was given what can we make of what Nicklas just presented and the trends and all of this information that you just received. Given that we are speaking at an inclusion and diversity forum, I just wanted to say that you have two white guys, speaking to you on the future this morning. And this was not because the organization did try to have other speakers, so that we would really adhere to these principles of inclusion and diversity. So I just wanted you to know about this, because sometimes we are quick to point the finger on these issues, but the organization did try to have, besides me and Nicklas, other speakers that would make this a more diverse panel. But so what I would try to do with you is sort of how to empower you to use the future, and from Nicklas' presentation, when you start looking at trends, and normally trends come with projections for the future, it seems that the future might be preordained. And my first message to you is that the future is not necessarily preordained, and foresight and futures is really, in my view, this is my understanding, also working then at the European Union institutions before, helping decision makers think also about the future. For me, future is a call to action. It's about empowering us to also be able to change the future. I mean, the session this morning is visions of a distant future. Nicklas provided us one vision when we were asked to close our eyes. But I ask you, what is your vision for the future? What are you going, when you sit around these tables in a few minutes? What is your vision? What is your preferred future? What kind of Europe would you want to have? And in the work that you do on inclusion and diversity, what is your vision? So that would be my question, because foresight is very much about shaping the future. It's about preparing for the future. And sometimes the future can be scary. Or again, we might think that when we look at all of these trends and we see, okay, demography is going to evolve like this, and urbanization is going to evolve like this, democracy is moving in this direction, we might just think powerless. And that's what can we do about these things? Of course, some of the trends are, like Nicklas was saying, develop over the years. And mostly, if you think of it, trends are very much about the past because they're about data. And about the future, there is no data. There are no facts about the future. The future is yet to be made. But that would be my first point, is that foresight is about action, is a call to action. The second point that I would want to make is that never think of the future in singular terms. The future is always plural. As a famous or a very distinguished futurist, Stuart Candy says, the future is a landscape of possibilities. And so we should never approach this idea of what is to come as just a single, as sort of a single possibility. And I think this also allows us to think that how can we then interpret and understand these trends. Also, I would ask you now, can you look at the person to your right? Look at the person in your right. I'm going to tell you, that person on your right, and if you don't have anyone on your right, look to the person on your left. That person knows as much about the future as you or I do. And so, the future, in a sense, is an open field. It's a level playing field that we all can sort of try to build together. And so, this is, this notion that we are actually able to shape the future. I think it's very important. And as Nicklas was saying, the EU is also, is thinking about its future. In the conference on the future of Europe, but much more than that. There have been many developments on futures and foresight. To use again Nicklas' expression, literacy at the EU institutions also over the past few years. And I would say that the fact that we are today having here a conversation about the future to a certain extent, it reflects this idea that we are all more thinking that, again, like I was saying, the future is a landscape of possibilities. The future is also a contested playing field that many want to be part of. And so it is really important that the EU, I mean, the institutions, are thinking about how the future is gonna evolve. How the trends are shaping, but also what can we do about those trends. And I think it would be really, really interesting if in the next minutes that you have or hours, that you would really think about visions for the future. There's a method that is used widely in institutions, in governments. Many governments are now doing vision to 2030 or vision to 2050, trying to see, or to try to understand how would they like their country to look like. And you can do the same. You can try to understand or try to envision what the future of inclusion and diversity would look like, And once you have that vision, once you imagine that, you can also then try to move back from the future into the present and try to understand what would be the decisions, the plans, the policies that would need to be enacted and implemented to make that future possible. And ask yourselves, do you have the future that you want? And I think this is again, I keep on repeating this because I think that this point is very important. We need to understand if we want to be players or if we want to be a playfield of the future, because to a certain extent, the future is happening to us. And even if, it is very much, as Nicklas was saying as well, a product in our imagination, the future is happening, and we should again be able to prepare for them. And Nicklas has his very sort of he was mentioning Pupul Beach, who is also one of my heroes in foresight, because her idea, which is such a simple idea, but it's really so important, which is a future for all cannot be imagined by just a few. And so I think this idea of inclusion, of participatory foresight or participatory democracy, as it were, because I think these two concepts come together, are really important. And when we speak about inclusion, in my view, because sometimes it's easy sometimes to be inclusive, but inclusion is not about inviting someone to a party. It's actually that everybody that comes to the party then can dance, that can actually go to the dance floor and take an active role. So, in ways to try now for example, to make this more concrete, I just wanted to give you an example. Nicklas gave a couple of examples of things that are being done to make the future more present in societies, from schools to organizations to civil society organizations. There is there's recent work being done on intergenerational fairness. It's work that is being done by the Gulbenkian Foundation and the School of International Futures, precisely to look at how can policies guarantee intergenerational fairness. And here I would say that I would recommend you that you would look into the work that these two organizations are doing. In the slides that I sent that you will have access, you will have the links for this. But basically, what these two organizations have done, they have basically created a framework for assessing policies from an intergenerational standpoint criteria. And so basically what you try to do when you look at any type of policies, and this is sort of a growing movement, and so there is also, if you want, the trainings in this intergenerational fairness assessment. So this is something that you can potentially look into when you visit the webpage there I recommend, and you see more the information. But what I think it would be important, and I want to tie this with the projects that some of you are associated with. Both the Erasmus Plus, also the European Solidarity Corps. I mean, in a sense, the idea of one of the main ideas of this intergenerational fairness criteria to basically to have an assessment, a long-term assessment in policy making, is precisely to look at whether policies today are perpetuating inequalities, for example. And Nicklas he just mentioned that we know that in the long term, populations, and very much in Europe, will be over 65 years old. So there will be a lot, and we will live longer, and we will live healthier. Okay, Europeans globally in terms of demography will be fewer in the future than other parts of the world. But we know that longevity is a trend that we will need to understand. So, if the system currently is already tipped off to the older generations, as opposed to the younger generations, how are we able to set up policies? And I think, for example, the issues of climate change fit very well in this discussion. How are we, crafting policy? Are we crafting policies that allows us to be able to make sure that anyone, either born or unborn, has the same opportunities, and his or her interests are not affected by decisions that we take today? And I think the programs that I was just referring to, they are not. I mean, they are tools to precisely to create opportunity for younger generations of Europeans and beyond Europe to have opportunities to travel, to study, to work, to support, and to help others. Because many times, as we know, our future many times could be determined by the place or in the family that we were born, depending on where we are born. And this, there are studies about this. It could determine our future. So what we really need to make sure is that there is a level playing field for everyone, that there are opportunities that are created for everybody, irrespective of their age, gender, sexual orientation, backgrounds, ethnicity, religious views, political views. It doesn't matter. There should, in a sense, what we need to make sure when we look into the future is that everybody has a stake. Everybody should be part of it. And so I think I would, in the end, again, I'll go to Carlos' question. When Nicklas ended about what would be the message, and for me the message to you is in two words: is be bold, be empowered, and take really the future in your hands, and I will give the same advice as Nicklas. Learn more about futures, learn more about foresight, use it regularly, even in your personal lives, to think ahead. And engage with this conversation, because in a sense, if we are all better prepared for the future, I think we'll also be more resilient societies, but also, again, which is the purpose of our conversation today, more inclusive, more diverse, more representative of what we are as humanity. So thank you very much for inviting me again. I would rather be there now and sort of just walk around the tables and be even more specific and concrete and do a little bit of workshopping with you. But anyway, it was not possible this time. Maybe for our next occasion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. Really nice, really good thoughts, insights, empowering message for us. Peter Jan, do we have questions for Ricardo?
Yes, we have. There's someone who likes the idea of the future as this open playing field and landscape of possibilities. But on the other hand, this person says that we in terms of climate change, we need to present global warming predictions almost as facts to move people to do something. And how would you then, Ricardo, think of how we use the idea of level playing field to think about climate change?
I mean, I think that is a very good question. But for me, it's not yet clear. I mean, maybe the person that is asking this question, and everybody in this room has already understood this problem to its limits. I think, as the way we see, and Nicklas in his presentation, he had given us sort of the projections of, if global warming goes above 1.5%, 2%, these things are still in the open. So, and that's why this message of empowerment is important, because to a certain extent, the future in that respect is still a playing field or an open field, because we still don't know yet exactly what will be the result of the actions. And we know that according to current projections, we are already going to miss already in 2040. We're going to reach the 1.5 degrees. So in current trajectories, like the person that is asking the question, in the particular case of climate change, there's not so much to do. I mean, we can't do much more. I'm not. What is the right word? We really need to act on this. So in here, let's say our human agency or our freedom of choice will be more what kind of policies, what policy choices are we going to make? But we do know that we need to achieve these goals. So in a sense, there's less choice, or their choice in terms of the policies and the menu or the toolbox in terms, let's say, of energy mix, of the technologies that you developed to capture carbon that is already in the atmosphere, so on and so forth. In terms of the urgency of the things that you need to do, I'm afraid that now it's already too late. So indeed, there are issues, and we could use the same example with demography. It is very hard to change the demographic trends unless you have top-down policies, where you force either people not to have children, or you force people to have children, or you improve medical services, or to give you a concrete example, in Portugal, the age of retirement was just readjusted because it's now projected that life expectancy will be reduced because of COVID-19. So retirement age is also going to be reduced by 2 or 3 months, for example. This is very unusual. This is normally, the past trend used to be that retirement age continues to increase. So on some of these things, it's really, the trends are hard to bend. But my message would still be, we are, in open and free societies like ours, we have still the ability to make change, and we should depart from that. Is it going to be easy? Are we going to be successful every time? No way. It's always going to be. There's always going to, like Nicklas was saying, there's always the counter trend. There's always those that don't want change. There are always those that want to keep things as they are. So that's why also things don't move so fast. These things take time. But okay, in the climate change is a good example. But in my view, it's still an open field, because I don't see the urgency that I would like to see in so many quarters. And besides, we should also, I think that climate change, it's almost like what we need to do is almost like a life changing transition. From the way we eat, consume, move around. Any area of our lives will need to change to a certain degree, so that we can meet this challenge. So again, but I think there are many areas in which we can intervene. Sorry, this was a little bit long, Ricardo.
No worries. Do we have more questions?
Yeah, we have one more question. It's less about the future, but I'll ask it because I think it's a quite important and interesting question. So, Ricardo, what would your opinion be about the self-excluding members of society? So, people that don't want to be included in the socio-economical, political, or digital processes, and what could their impact be in the future of their passiveness?
That's actually a really interesting question, because the last Saturday, I spoke at one of the citizens panels at the Conference on the Future of Europe, and I was and my talk was on European autonomy. How can we ensure European autonomy? And I did speak a little bit about technology and of course on let's say on issues of strategic autonomy, from the defense sector to supply chains. I mean, all of these things, and then of course invariably the conversation ended up on technologies and the type of products that we have today. And very interestingly, most of the questions in that session, and these were citizens. I mean, they are selected randomly, I think, and there's a process to select. Most of the questions were precisely from an angle that goes to your point for those. And so basically the questions were, but why do we need all these technologies? But why do we need all these new products? And why do we need to consume so much? And so, I don't know how representative this group of people would be. I don't know what, like you say, these people that want to self isolate or self-withdraw from society. I think we have had groups of people that it's not an issue that I know that I know well, but I would say that it's in a sense these people that you are referring to have chosen a type of future that does not want to participate in the future that the majority will. But I thought, for example, that this question that was asked previously on this, for example, urbanization trend, I also had questions about this urbanization trend. I really don't know if we're all going to be living in cities in the future. That has been sort of, let's say, the long, heavy trend from the past is precisely this: it's urban, that we will live in urban settings. But if technology evolves the way it is, do we really need to be working in the city? Can't we work remotely all the time? And especially if we go to the metaverse, which I still think it's very much an elitist thing. It's if we look at Africa and access to internet and this type of technologies. The metaverse can only come from the mind of Zuckerberg, and so it's not it's certainly not for now. So I would say that self-exclusion from society, it's in a way, it's not a self-exclusion from the future. It might be a different future from the one that maybe we would choose for ourselves, but and they might not participate. But that's also a choice, and I think we live in free society, so people should be free to choose their future.
Thank you. Our session starts to wind to its end. Thank you very much for both of our speakers. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Nicklas. Can I have